They say men are afraid of commitment, but the truth is men over 50 aren't afraid of love. They're afraid of losing the peace they bled to rebuild. You won't see these reasons on wedding invitations, but they're real, they're raw, and they explain why so many men over 50 simply never remarry. If you've ever stayed quiet just to protect your peace, drop a comment. Not every man stays single from pain. Some do it from principle. 1. They've already been there and didn't like the exit. Most men over 50 who are single today aren't clueless. They aren't afraid, and they certainly aren't inexperienced. They've been husbands. They've done the anniversaries, the compromises, the late-night talks, and early morning fights. They've loved deeply, not in the flashy, dramatic way you see in movies, but in the quiet, everyday kind of love. The kind that shows up at the hospital, that fixes a car at midnight, that works weekends without being asked. He remembers the vows. He meant them. He stayed even when it hurt. He forgave more than he should have. He gave more than he got back. And he hoped desperately that it would last. But it didn't. And when it ended, it didn't just break his heart. It broke his identity. He didn't just lose a wife. He lost a family rhythm, a home, sometimes himself. He remembers sitting in a courtroom where everything sacred was reduced to documents, where decades of effort were divided like property, where love once so intimate became an equation. The pain of losing someone while they're still alive is something you don't fully understand until you've been through it. And after that, the idea of remarriage doesn't feel sweet. It feels dangerous. Because now he knows what can happen. He knows that even the best intentions can crumble under years of pressure. That promises don't always equal permanence. And that starting over isn't always brave sometimes. It's reckless. So when people ask, "Why haven't you remarried?" he doesn't explain. He doesn't argue. He just smiles and stays silent. Because for some men, choosing not to remarry isn't about fear. It's about wisdom earned the hard way. 2. They know the system is stacked against them. This one isn't about love. It's about the law. Because in the real world, men over 50 don't just carry emotional scars from past marriages. They carry financial ones too. He's seen it not just in his own life, but in his friends. Men who gave everything, loyalty, income, stability, and then lost everything. Not because they cheated, not because they failed, but when things went south, the system didn't protect them. One man he knows pays $1,200 a month to a woman who left him 5 years ago. Another lost his business in a divorce settlement and still hasn't recovered. A third sees his kids once a month because of court limitations. It's not about bitterness. It's about patterns, because in too many cases, men feel like they don't just lose a relationship, they lose everything. And while the world says, "Just try again," he knows better. Trying again can mean risking decades of savings, risking his home, risking his emotional equilibrium, even risking his relationship with his adult children, especially if the new partner causes division. He doesn't want to become another statistic, another man who ignored the warning signs and paid the price again. He's not anti-love, but he's anti-losing himself. And the system, it hasn't changed enough to earn his trust back. So when someone says, "Maybe this time will be different," he nods politely, but deep down, he's already made peace with the truth. When you've already seen how the game is played, you stop pretending it's a fair one. And he'd rather keep what little peace he's built than roll the dice on a structure that never once played in his favor. 3. They don't want to be providers again. For decades, he carried the unspoken contract. He provided not just because he could, but because he was taught that real men don't hesitate. He worked overtime, skipped vacations, paid for braces, college, and broken cars, sometimes with a smile, often with quiet fatigue. He didn't complain, but it cost him. His body, his sleep, his laughter. Now that he's over 50, his credit score is solid. His mortgage might be paid off. His spending is simple: a good cup of coffee, a quiet weekend, maybe a hobby he never had time for before. And yet, every time someone brings up remarriage, he flinches not because of fear, but because of math. He knows how it starts. A few meals, a few gifts, then suddenly he's picking up the check. Every time. Fixing things she could have fixed herself. Covering just one little emergency that becomes a pattern. It's not that he minds giving. He's just tired of being expected to, as if love is another invoice he must pay monthly. He remembers when romance turned into logistics, when affection came second to finances, when the thank yous stopped and the you shoulds started. This time around, he doesn't need a dependent. He needs a peer, someone who values presence more than presence, someone who sees the man before the money. Because being a provider isn't the problem. Being reduced to one is. And if a relationship begins to feel like another job description, he'd rather clock out for good. 4. They fear becoming a nurse or a wallet, not a partner. This isn't about lacking compassion. It's about not wanting to disappear. He's seen it play out far too often. A friend remarries in his 60s, thinking he's found connection. But within 2 years, he's scheduling her doctor appointments, managing medications, driving to specialists, while his own needs fade into the background. What began as love becomes logistics. What was once laughter becomes lab results. He doesn't mind helping someone through illness. He just doesn't want to be chosen for that purpose. To be someone's plan for comfort, care, or financial security instead of their partner in presence. He's not looking for perfection. He knows people age, and aging brings challenges. But he fears being pulled into a dynamic where he's no longer loved, only needed. He doesn't want his affection traded for access, his stability mistaken for servitude. He fears the quiet transition from "I love you" to "Can you run this errand?" From "We're in this together" to "You're the only one I can count on." He wants to be seen as a man, not a nurse, not a chauffeur, not a savior. Marriage at this stage should feel like rest, not responsibility, like deep companionship, not quiet duty. He's not running from closeness. He's running from the erasure of self, the way so many older men disappear behind someone else's needs. So when he stays single, it's not from selfishness, it's from self-awareness. Because he's not afraid of growing old. He's afraid of growing invisible. And if love comes with a hidden job description, he'll pass. Because after all these years, he's not looking to be useful. He's finally looking to be understood. 5. They don't trust easily anymore, and that's earned. Trust, for him, isn't casual anymore. It's cautious. And it's earned, not given. There was a time when he believed every "I love you," every "I'd never hurt you," every plan for the future that included him, until it didn't as our place. He remembers the day he realized the words no longer matched the energy, when the warmth started to feel transactional, when promises became currency, and withdrawal came without warning. He gave his heart once completely. He answered every late-night question. He apologized even when he wasn't wrong. He fought for a relationship long after it stopped fighting for him. And in the end, he was left holding silence, blame, and legal paperwork. That kind of betrayal doesn't just hurt, it rewires a man. Not into bitterness, but into vigilance. Now, he doesn't judge quickly, but he notices everything. He watches how people treat strangers, how they talk about their exes, how they respond to being told no. He doesn't need perfection. He needs proof. And he no longer ignores red flags just because the beginning feels good. Because he's learned what feels familiar isn't always what's safe. And charm, without character, is just practiced deception. He's not testing anyone. He's just finally listening with more than his heart. So when she shows consistency, kindness, and patience, he notices. And when she shows control, flattery, or emotional shortcuts, he notices that too. He doesn't ghost. He lets go respectfully, but firmly. Because at this age, he values something deeper than attraction: emotional safety. 6. They enjoy their freedom more than they miss romance. You'd think being alone would feel empty. But for him, it finally feels complete. For years, his days were filled with obligations. Birthdays, appointments, opinions, negotiations. Even love required effort, sometimes more than he had left to give. Now, his mornings start with quiet. He makes his coffee exactly how he likes it. No discussion, no compromise. He eats when he's hungry, sleeps when he's tired, reads when he wants not, when it's convenient for both. Freedom has rewired his nervous system. No more scanning the room for emotional cues. No more wondering, is she okay? No more guilt for doing nothing. He spends on what feeds him, not what appeases someone else. Maybe it's a fishing trip. Maybe it's a new guitar. Maybe it's just peace bought in silence. And yes, he once feared this, the silence, the solitude. But now, he's discovered that solitude isn't absence, it's presence with himself. He doesn't miss the butterflies. He's found something better, stillness without confusion. And when others tell him, "You just need someone to share life with," he nods politely, because they don't understand. He is sharing life, with his peace, with his space, with a version of himself he spent decades ignoring. Romance isn't missing. It's just evolved into freedom, into autonomy, into finally feeling like he belongs to himself without explanation. 7. They've outgrown the cultural pressure. When he was younger, questions like, "When are you getting married?" used to feel like deadlines, like if he didn't settle down by a certain age, he had somehow failed life's checklist. Family asked, co-workers hinted, even friends teased, as if manhood wasn't complete without a wedding band. And for a while he believed them. He chased the image, the picture-perfect partnership, the white picket fence. He wanted to prove he was doing it right. But now, that pressure has faded not because the world stopped asking, but because he stopped caring. Because somewhere between burying a friend, signing divorce papers, and waking up alone but alive, he learned the difference between being loved and being needed for optics. He realized marriage doesn't guarantee growth. Partnership doesn't always mean peace. And settling down often turns into settling, period. He's not against companionship. He's against conformity, because true maturity isn't about checking off cultural boxes. It's about waking up every day and not betraying yourself. He no longer seeks applause. He seeks alignment. And when someone tries to guilt him into giving love another shot, he doesn't get defensive. He doesn't explain. He just sips his coffee, smiles, and goes back to enjoying a life that finally feels like his. Because outgrowing social pressure isn't rebellion. It's relief. And the absence of judgment tastes a whole lot better than the presence of praise. 8. They realize love is optional, but peace is not. He's not anti-love. He just knows what love is not. It's not dependency. It's not emotional debt. And it's definitely not the price of being seen as whole. He's been in love before, real love, the kind that made him build a life, a family, a future. But he's also seen how love, when misaligned, can become a slow erosion of self. He remembers what it's like to lose his voice in order to keep someone else calm, to give up hobbies, friendships, and time just to keep the relationship from breaking. And now, after rebuilding piece by piece what was lost, he protects that piece like it's oxygen. He no longer views love as something owed. It's optional, and it must enhance, not consume. He doesn't need someone in his bed to feel warm. He doesn't need validation through couple photos or anniversary posts. He just needs clarity, stillness, room to breathe. So when someone says, "But aren't you lonely?" they misunderstand what loneliness really is. He's not avoiding love. He's avoiding confusion disguised as closeness. He's not running from connection. He's just refusing to pay for it with his peace. Because at this age, peace is no longer negotiable. And if love demands its place by disturbing that peace, it's not love, it's noise. So when he chooses not to remarry, it's not because he's wounded, it's because he's wise. And that wisdom whispers something younger men haven't heard yet. Peace isn't the absence of love. Sometimes it's the reward for surviving it. Not every older man who stays single is bitter. Some are just done sacrificing themselves for a version of love that never fit. They're not waiting. They're not mourning. They've simply said, "I had my chapter. This one is just for me." What made you stop looking for love and start building peace instead? Let someone younger hear it. He's watching and learning.